Ushma Neill here as editor-at-large of the JCI for one last contribution to the series, Conversations with Giants in Medicine. Since the Conversation series was first pitched as an idea by Howard Rockman when he took over as editor-in-chief of the JCI in 2012, it has spanned 74 interviews with 80 people. The interviewees included 15 Nobel Prize winners, 27 Lasker laureates, 65 members of the National Academy of Sciences, and 70 members of the National Academy of Medicine, 18 women and 62 men. The series launched exactly 13 years ago, and colleagues convinced Harold Varmus to be our first subject. I tried so hard to be prepared and had read tens of interviews and his myriad opinion pieces. And yet still, when I asked him one question midway through the interview, his reply was, "Why don't I answer the question I think you should have asked me?" That bit was carefully edited out. I perhaps got better at being even more prepared and better able to steer the conversations. But truly, part of the fun was uncovering the layers of people's stories, hearing about their early influences through their training and the establishment of their labs, sometimes their political leanings. The one through line in all the interviews was the intense passion for science and the thrill of discovery. I also always ask each subject the same last question. What other vocation do you think could have kept you as motivated if you could not have been a scientist or a physician? So many pushed back and wondered how there could ever be another career for them. But in our midst are those who were almost teachers, lawyers, stand-up comedians, historians, and some politicians. And as I've now had a career spanning science, editorial, research, and educational administration, I think my own personal choice would be a pastry chef. There's something so scientific and specific, yet creative about it. I hope that you will enjoy this supercut of the many alternate aspirations of our giants in medicine. Thank you so much for allowing me to bring you this series.
At least three things in that list. One is journalism, which I totally entertained for a while when I was running the Amherst College newspaper. And my wife is a journalist, and I like what she does. Second possibility would be professor of English literature. After all, I was on my way there as a graduate student and liked that a lot. I wish I were more talented either as a musician or as an athlete to have entertained careers in those areas. I love bike riding. I don't think I have the strength, talent, and competitive spirit in high enough quantity to be a professional bike rider, but I would find that entertaining. Or I'm not sure I could maintain the pace required either to be a member of a chamber quartet or or on the professional tennis cycle. But those would be things I would enjoy doing. The problem is I probably would only want to do them 10% of the time.
Medicine has so many outflow pathways, all the way from public health to science to patient care, as you well know, that I think it's extraordinarily open for any versatility that one has. I suppose I would have been a lawyer or something, but in a small southern town, you always just thought mostly of the professions if you were middle class.
Well, I was very interested in history, and I was interested in history and government and that sort of thing, and I thought I'd be a graduate student. I also, when I was much younger, I used to paint a lot, and I thought I might want to be an artist, but medicine is such a rich and full life that I can't imagine anything else right now. And I don't think I'll ever stop being a physician.
My principal interest before medicine was in philosophy and literature, particularly poetry. And I would have tried, had circumstances been different, to develop a career in those areas, presumably in the university.
I have a good time wherever I go, and I enjoy a lot of different things in life. And I considered becoming an English teacher, an old-fashioned English teacher, of doing a broader course in the humanities and American studies. I considered archaeology as a possibility. I thought of a lot of things.
My second choice would be to be a curator at a good museum. We're very interested in art.
I guess I was on this path to become a academic professor of chemistry. And had I not decided to expand my horizons in the second year of a PhD program in chemistry, I might very well have followed that tack. And I'm sure that would have also been scientifically exciting and interesting. But I'm really honored and delighted by the doors that have opened since then that have greatly expanded the kind of science that I've had a chance to participate in my own laboratory, in efforts such as the Genome Project leading large teams, and now in this position of trying to steer the ship called the NIH in the direction that means the most for the public and for the scientific community. I could never have imagined that as this kid growing up on a dirt farm with no plumbing in the Shenandoah Valley.
I don't believe I ever considered any other pathway from the time I was a sub-teenager onward.
So I've been constantly stimulated, and I am as excited today about these questions, some of which have been ruminating for 6 decades than I have been for all the years.
I could imagine myself as writing about history. I really like history. I could imagine myself as a sports writer. Those two come to, but professional athletes probably out of the question because it requires some ability for that. So I'd probably go with history or sports writing.
And I thought about it. I'd like to be a constitutional lawyer. And my wilder dream, either a professor at the University of Constitutional Law, or in my wilder dreams be a Supreme Court justice. And in my wildest dreams be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
A fishing captain. I love the water. I still love the outdoors. I'm a very avid fisherman. I'm a pretty good fisherman too. I won't brag about the science, but I'll brag about that. And so I actually can outfish a lot of fishing captains. And so in the ideal world, I actually wouldn't mind being a charter captain or something like that. And this is all just spinning yarns because I got into science so young that I never really even felt face to quest. I mean, by the time I was 19 or 20 years old, I was kind of in the path of going into science. I like journalism. I have to say that a very good friend of ours, a very close personal friend of ours, writes for the Boston Globe, and I'm always extremely interested in hearing all the details of what she does. If I was in journalism, I'm not sure I would want to go in science journalism, but I like journalism a lot. I enjoy writing, actually, and that's something which a lot of my colleagues don't. I actually enjoy writing. So I could imagine being a newspaper reporter or something. So newspaper reporter or fishing captain. Fishing captain is not so easy to make a living.
So my perfect life would have been to have played on the left wing for Manchester United between the ages of 18 and 35. Before then, taking up singer-songwriting a la Tom Waits, or even the best of the Sinatra era between about 35 and 50. Then, winning my Nobel Prize in Science between 50 and 70, and then finishing by writing the great Irish novel, but a la Gabriel Garcia Marquez rather than. So I think I would have liked. If you could fit everything into a possible life, the sporting, the musical, the scientific, and the literary would have all featured.
What would I do if I was not a doctor? That's a very, very scary thought. I think I would still very much want to do something in science. I actually, a long, long time ago, wanted to understand how we could grow crops that would feed people in places where fertilizer and all sorts of access to the kinds of things that happen in agriculture in the United States were unavailable. And I actually worked on projects to provide nitrogen fixation in rhizobium plants to allow them to have intrinsic fertilizer. So I love to garden, and perhaps I would go and do something related to a more global issue. I think there's incredible amounts of science that have exploded in those arenas. Same too with alternative energy approaches and the like. So I think there would be something science-y about what I would do. I would hope it might take me outside a bit more. I'm not someone who likes to be inside all the time. So those would be really interesting things. And the other thing I probably would do would be to teach. I would probably do some teaching.
Those of us who are involved in medicine and medicine research are very fortunate to be able to be doing what we're involved in and enjoying it.
Well, if I hadn't been a biomedical researcher, very likely I would have been some kind of a naturalist and probably a writer. And
So those early walks through the wood catching butterflies that your father teased you about certainly were impressionable.
yes, they were. Being a birder, it's something I hope to go back to if I ever have any time again.
I would like to live my life not in one chunk of 80, 90, 70 years, however God or whoever assigned me, allotted me with, but in pieces. You know, living 5 years, dying for 5, and seeing the progress in science. We have entered a very exciting period now. The human genome, understanding what's going on. For now, it looks like a swamp. So, now I think that we start to have tools to understand real biology, and that's exciting. So, I don't know what I would have done if I would have been, I probably would have gone to a neuroscience.
I didn't know I was going to go into academic medicine. I mean, I love teaching. I had a great interest in English literature. I mean, I suppose if I wasn't doing medicine, maybe I would be, like doing English literature or something, but you can't say.
I often feel that the culture I grew up in Germany was a culture which put an enormous value on the intrinsic importance of knowledge and truth. And I feel that cultural attribute has sort of become less over the last decades. And I think that nowadays I would be more interested in sort of a more, not that I would be able to do it, but in a more advocacy role, because I feel that although there's much we don't know, that we also must discuss, understand, promote, possibly, or maybe dispense with this idea that knowledge is intrinsically important and how we deal with it in a society.
Well, I grew up in Australia, so this is a sports-made culture. So I did play a lot of tennis and I enjoyed it. Tennis was a very low-ranking sport in the social hierarchy in Australia. In Melbourne, it's Australian rules football, but I'm about 1 foot too small for being good at Australian rules. So instead I was playing tennis at school. But that had an advantage because I'm 100% certain that none of my school friends are still playing Australian rules more than 15 years later, but I can still play tennis and I enjoy playing tennis with my son. But I wouldn't have never become a professional tennis player. I think they also are rather more physically substantial specimens.
I think I would have probably been a professor of history. My hobby is history, World War II history, history of Europe between the wars and after post-war Europe. I'm very interested in Soviet history and Russian history. I probably would have been a history professor or maybe a diplomat. I could easily see being a diplomat, although not in an era dominated by a Republican Congress.
What would I be if I weren't a scientist? I'd like to be a movie star. I'm a ham, right? I really would. I like to, I don't think I'm going to let you put this on this thing. No, I would, so I love, okay, so the real truth is, right, I like, giving seminars. I like talking about things. I like people, this sounds arrogant. I don't mean, I like people paying attention to me, and like like being engaged with me. And so I guess we would pick some other career like that, like probably a stand-up comic or, something like that where you're in front of an audience. Like I get, I do think when I'm, giving seminars, and it's performance art, right? It is, there's a narrative, and so I guess I would do something that kept me in front of an audience, right? But the truth is whenever I'm in front of an audience, if I don't have a picture of Vibrio Harvey behind me, I'm frozen. And so this is big talk because I am terrified of all things, of talking about anything except science.
Fortunately, I'm still interested in things that are based in science. And that's what's so exciting. You can make dramatic changes in the way people live. And you can help people through science. And that's what I've learned. And I don't know what I would have done had it not been medical science. I can't believe it could be anything else. I can't understand why anybody would work in any other field.
It would almost certainly be in the arena of teaching something. Could be teaching Latin, or it could be teaching English, or it could be teaching something. But I love to teach because I like to take complicated concepts and make them simple for someone to understand. There's a certain rush you get when someone is confused about something and you explain it in a way that they really can understand the concept that you're trying to make. So I would think teaching in whatever subject I happen to like, if I wasn't doing science or medicine.
It's very, very difficult to tell, actually. Maybe I would have, I'm interested in ancient history, in classics that I read, for fun. But I don't think I would been able to make a career out of that. I think I'm very fortunate in being able to find, in science, in research, what I really want to do.
I think if I'd been born in another family, I would have been attracted to international journalism because of the fascination with other countries, travel. I'm not sure I would have been successful because I don't know if I'm aggressive in the effective way. But that was interesting. And of course, you ask people, what do they read for fun? It often tells you a lot about them. I read history, biographies. I read science, but more history and biographies.
Oh, I would have tried, probably, but I would have never made it in English literature. And the reason I wouldn't have made it is the standards were too high. Honestly, if you had to have a summa cum laude performance at Harvard College to even have a chance to get into the graduate school. The Yale and Harvard graduate schools in English literature were amazing. I mean, the quality of the people were quite extraordinary. So no, I think that would have been like me wanting to be the quarterback in the New England Patriots. It wasn't going to happen. But I didn't have the talent.
I really couldn't answer that question. I think I probably would have found a way to be a scientist no matter what. Actually, if I could turn that around in a sort of a different way, I advise a lot of students at Yale now. Sometimes undergraduates. We have freshman advisees, also seniors. And as they kind of get close to graduation, or they're, let's say, a junior, typical question is, I'm thinking about maybe I should go to medical school, or I think I might want to do biomedical research, and I'm kind of on the edge. What should I do? And what I always tell people is, ask yourself the following question. If someone told you today you could never be a scientist, okay, no matter what would it feel like? And if someone would say, I would find that kind of discouraging. And I'd say, well, you shouldn't be a scientist. But if someone says to me, I would feel like someone just kicked me in the gut, okay, and my firstborn son was deathly ill, okay, if that's what it feels like, which is the way it would have felt to me, then I say you should go into science no matter what, because you can't do anything else.
It's very hard to say. I was very interested in history to this day, but whether I would have ever chosen that as a field, I think unlikely. It's hard for me to judge,
So the only other career that I explored, and is actually what I thought I would do until I got into the one medical school I applied to, is I was getting my teaching certificate at Dartmouth. I would have been a high school science teacher and been a sports coach.
I think the young people that I've trained over the years
after family has been the most rewarding. So I'm kind of a coach, mentor.
I think I would have tried to be an architect. When I was a teenager, I came across some articles about Frank Lloyd Wright and showing in the House Beautiful magazine. But it was displays of many of the houses he had done. And it just struck me that this was so beautiful. And then at Dartmouth, I took this course on art and architecture. And I really got to understand how architecture is developed. And there was a big section on Frank Lloyd Wright. So I always admired him and that field. Now, I don't know if I would have the talent to do that. Certainly would never have been a Frank Lloyd Wright, but it's something that I think would be very, very satisfying.
I think, so would I be able to do some of the issues which I feel very passionate about, like issues of, I don't know, protecting the environment or those type of things. I worry I would not be very good in doing this. I would be just totally not able to do this. I would be passionate about it, but probably totally ineffective. So this would be one thing I would certainly would be interested in. I certainly like a lot to build things. So like building wooden things. And so I could spend quite a lot of time on
So a carpenter.
it would be something I certainly feel is a very satisfying thing. You do something, you start it, and you finish it. In science, you do something and never works, we don't finish it. Different thing, with the exceptions.
I told you my love of Bach music. I said I would love to have been born Johann Sebastian Bach. I think he had a grand life. He had all sorts of problems. He got put in jail at one time because he was too obstinate about something or other. But he would have been. That's a life I would have loved to have lived.
I often think about this, and I often think about what happens if I had stayed at Columbia. What happens if I had never met Donald Selden? What happens if then I would never have gone to the Brown and Goldstein laboratory. I would be a scientist, which is, I really do think, was where I was supposed to be. I really don't know. I mean, when I was young, I played the piano. I wanted to be a pianist. That was totally unrealistic. I don't know. I might have ended up going and, I might have gotten a job and then I would have worked my way up. I do have confidence in that if a system is working well, there are lots of dysfunctional systems, but if a system is working well and you work hard and do a good job, the system kind of pulls you up. So I really don't know what it would have been. I mean, certainly I have administrative skills, and as do everybody else in my family.
No, music, I had a lot of fun playing music. I mean, one of them, when I was a postdoc at San Diego, I played with the band, a couple of times a week, and it took its toll, and, staying up late and drinking too much beer sometimes, but
did it generate any aha moments?
When you get a group of people and you're really in it, and everybody's clicking, and we have a band now called the Checkpoints. It's named after Checkpoint Blockade. Everybody in the band does immunotherapy, but we played together long enough to, we start into something, and Tom Gajewski, who's really the leader of the band, play a lead guitar thing, and he'll look over and nod, and I know that's time when you're communicating non-verbally, just was it's a wonderful sort of thing when you really, have a band really clicking. I really love that. I could have done that. I don't think I would have done well. I'm not that good, but I did have a point when I was a postdoc when the band I played with decided to move back to Texas, to Central Texas, and play the Green Hall, dance circuit. And I said, no, I can't go. I got a day job. I got to stick with that.
I like to solve problems. So I don't know exactly really if I have to do it all over again, what I would do, but it would be something, that's what I enjoy the most. I feel, I put my mind, I want to solve a problem and I stick with it. So I think I would probably try to figure a way to solve some problem. Can't tell you in which domain. It could be anywhere from,
politics.
It could be, I trust me, I would love to find a way to really, and I would think, and I'll put energy into it so that really we can, turn things around and make people, through hope and education, do better things than, help mankind than some of the things we're seeing around us. So definitely. So I think that problem solving, I would say, is really at the root of what I enjoy the most. And I wouldn't know what the field could be, but it has to be something that I'd like to solve a problem.
The only alternative career I ever really thought of was a garbage collector. And the reason I'd like that is because you get up early and you finish collecting the garbage, and then you come back and can spend the rest of the day with your family. Now, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have chosen that as an alternative, but it's a question. That's the only other alternative other than medicine, practicing some sort of specialty in pediatrics I've ever really considered.
How about you, Ken?
Well, engineering might be too close to science, electrical engineering, programming. Probably would have done something like that. I like building things. I like making new things. So something along
carpenter.
I do carpentry on the side. I like doing that. I've built many of things. Finished a basement or two.
There isn't one. I love the career I've chosen. I can't imagine honestly doing anything else that would bring me as much joy as doing this.
Counselor.
Why?
I like people.
Yeah, well, I guess the one thing I pretended when I was younger, I guess, was that I was an FBI agent, and so investigating crimes, being a detective. It's like being a scientist, right? So that would probably be it. Yeah.
Well, I think I would have enjoyed being a science journalist. But I only learned how to write by writing textbooks forever. I mean, I spent years failing that too. So, but I would enjoy being a science teacher if I was given the freedom to teach the way I should teach.
I have never contemplated a career other than being a scientist. Even when I'm really frustrated at getting a paper rejected or a grant or something's not working, I really love what I do.
I think when I was growing up, I thought about law. I thought about architecture, but I have no three-dimensional senses, so that probably wouldn't have worked.
Maybe I would have been an artist. I don't think I had the courage to be an artist because it's too free-forming. Science allows this creative element, but in a more structured environment. That's maybe why I became a scientist. But maybe if I'd had the courage, I would have been an artist.
Well, if I had the talent, my first two choices would either to have been a wonderful miler or 1,500 meter runner. The second choice would have been to play football in the NFL. But when you're talking about what might have been feasible, I would have really liked to have been a high school biology teacher.
How about you?
Well, along Doug's lines, maybe a professional trout fly fisherman, but it's getting me a little old for me to do that. But I guess I was always really an academic, and I think I realized that really was the perfect thing for me. So if I couldn't do science in sort of an academic setting, I probably would have been something like a historian, could sort of study the flow of ideas and cultures and when cultures interact and things, things of that nature.
I
would not have gone into business or law. I know that, but I feel like I'm an academic at heart. I would have probably been a journal editor or something like that. I love reading. I love writing, and I like just talking about ideas. So,
professional tennis player, perhaps?
No, that's not in the cards.
I love being a scientist. The only thing I can come up with is being another kind of scientist.
Well, what other field of science then do you think would have held your interest?
I'm just going to give you some bad answers. I love neuroscience. What could be a more fascinating problem than understanding the human brain?
I can't answer that question. I mean, I'm so happy doing what I'm doing. It's almost inconceivable to me. And I think that in that sense, it's just extraordinarily lucky. I mean, I've had setbacks. I've told you some of them in, my personal life. There have been science disasters as well. And I can attribute, my joy in my current profession partly to maybe being, a cup half full person and being very optimistic. But I also think there's a kind of joy in serving others. And so that's partly why I've also, done so much in terms of, going back to be chair of Harvard or doing the BioX thing. It's just tremendously exciting also, to facilitate the career of other young scientists. So it's really hard for me to think of other careers. I think I had thought of other careers, sort of ski racer, ballet dancer. I mean, maybe architect. Thank God I didn't become an architect because, in science, when you have a failure of an experiment, you go home and you wake up the next morning, you do it again. In architecture, the building falls down. So I don't think that would have been a good career for me, but I very much admire and think about that as maybe could have been an alternative career.
The cheap answer is engineering. In fact, it took me years to realize I was actually more of an engineer than I was a scientist.
Okay, so then let me rephrase it.
Artist would be the next one, but I think that's also a cheat because the practical arts was a term for engineering at one point, and I have an artist in my lab, actually sometimes multiple, which he brings in. But they what they do is they do impractical engineering, which starts you to ask not like why, but why not? What, the realm of the possible rather than the practical. And then we morph that into something practical. So I like art. I was originally going to major in cinematography. My first semester in college was a cinematography major. And when I first started looking for a lab, one of the things I liked about the crystallography lab is they actually had a scanner where you could scan in photographs. And I had been looking for such a scanner for years because I thought, wouldn't it be cool if you could scan a photograph and then you could manipulate it in the computer? And just everybody I asked about that just said, why would you want to do that? It's then, years later there'll be Photoshop and, a huge fraction of animation is now done with computer manipulated imaging.
I have to just give you an honest answer here. There are many things I like to do, and I love to paint, and I still do, and I love to read. Science is my life. I knew that when I took that first organic chemistry course. And then when I met Colobacter, this bug that Jerry Hurwitz thought I was out of my mind starting with, I just want to figure it out. And there's nothing that I'd rather do other than my science. And when I do administrative work, and I've had offers to run all kinds of things, I couldn't accept that because I could never give up my lab.
Very easy answer, National Geographic photographer.
Well, in my case, I would have done physics because I did very well at school in physics and mathematics. And I thought I could do astronomy. Yeah. So I would have gone to astronomy. But then I thought at that time there were no satellites, nothing like that. So I couldn't imagine. I didn't want to end up teaching in a school, teaching physics. I thought, now that I've got something that has to excite me.
Yeah.
So I thought then the next best thing would be medicine.
Well, I started college, at a junior college, on a scholarship as a quarterback.
Turned out I was the least capable quarterback among three others who were better than I was, and I was the slowest man on the team, including the coaches. So it was clear that I was never going to make fame and fortune as an athlete, and although I was better at some other sports. And I loved to sing when I loved music, not in any great depth. But I just was thrilled with music. And my secret ambition, if I could have gone back and created my life, I would have been a saxophone player.
You know, I've thought about that, and I really can't imagine being anything other than a physician scientist. And as you see, I can't give up the physician part even for the science.
Wow, that's a hard question. It's just funny because over time, I've become increasingly convinced that this was the right path. What else could I have done? I could see teaching. I like teaching. I work at it.
What kind of an alternative career you might have had if you wouldn't have been a clinician or a scientist? But before I let you answer, I want to pre-prompt you by reading an email that I got from you in January of 2012, after we had had a chance to catch up at a Keystone meeting. So you said, and I quote, "The dinner at Coyote Cafe was by far the best meal I had in Santa Fe, and the company made it even better. We would certainly make a great political team, but I don't think America is quite ready for a Jewish president and an Indian American vegetarian vice president." So what do you think, Ron? Should we be running in 2024? I hear Indian vice presidents are all the rage these days.
Yeah, we were
be in your future.
We were definitely ahead of the curve with that idea of having the Indian vice president. But you could be the president, and I'd be happy to be your vice president. I think personally, it would be hard, even though I've liked leadership positions. In some ways, I think politics is probably not where I would put my first choice. Although one time I thought, being president would be a great job. But I think probably if I had to say, obviously I love doing science and I love doing what I'm doing. But I think that if you have a passion, you can be so happy doing many things. I think the people I'm most envious of in terms of their job is who, if I could steal somebody's talent and have another job, it would be to be a musician or a singer. I love music in all forms, just about. I play a couple of 3 instruments, not very well. I can't sing worth a darn because I unfortunately have the genetics of a bad voice. But I think that form of professional activity, if you're really good, to be a Yo-Yo Ma or Yitzhak Perlman, a virtuoso singer who has a great voice, or something like that. It must be so wonderful to be able to do something that not only gives you pleasure, but gives so many people pleasure when you do it.
Really trained to do what I'm doing now. I enjoy this so much that I'd be hard pressed to give you a second alternative. I think, fundamentally, people that, are interested in math and science are almost by definition educators. So I guess if there was an alternative path that I would have taken, it would have been in math or science education. But truly, I would, said when you're doing what you truly love and you actually get paid for it, you can't ask for anything better.
But, we all have fantasies. And I think if you say, well, what might you have fantasied being? Stand-up comic is one that has always really appealed to me. Jerry Seinfeld, that's sort of one of my heroes. So that would have been one. The only other one I can imagine would be a courtroom attorney. I would have to be pleading cases in front of a jury. I wouldn't want to sort of, be a research guy or professor of law or anything like that. I want to be in the courtroom. I think a prosecutor, not a defense attorney. Those are about the only two careers that I could think of.
I love almost everything that I think about or look at. So, I thought about being a lawyer for many years, maybe because I was told that I was argumentative and, would make a good lawyer. I like fixing things, although I'm not very good at it. I think accounting is cool. I've had tremendous exposure to the investment industry through interacting as a consultant to biotech or large pharma companies. I think working as an investment analyst is really cool. I love the financial services industry and, creative financial instruments and investing and equity. So, I'm not narrowing it down. There's just a lot of really cool things that one can do.
So that's a hard question because, my father wanted me to be a butcher, but I worked in the butcher shop and we did sausage, and I know all of these things. So recently they mentioned that instead of sausage, I am doing RNA, but yeah. So, we work also on the field, and it was also interesting, put a seed and then new seed. So that, of course, I like always the challenge, and I like that you never know what to do. And so I don't know that actually I have here the document I was 16 years old in high school, and it was written that I will be a scientist, and 2 biology teacher was assigned to me to do help. I just they just copied me. This was in the high school book, which is for the teachers. So I had never seen that.
I love art. I'm passionate about art, and actually, before I became director, I was always been painting, and so, but which basically was interrupted completely because I became director. So I think that a career in art is one that also would have appealed to me a lot, because what you do with art is not just to communicate to someone else a reality, to generate an emotion. I would tell you with that, and I do think that the way that we emotionally react to the world is a way of getting to know it. So, of course, the scientific discourse is a very powerful tool to understand and predict. But there is this other way of actually being able to explore our reality and to share it with others.
I mean, I'd love to be a pianist, a classical pianist. I'm just not good enough. I think it's that. I started a bit too late. And I used to have this fantasy that the best job in the world might be that of a writer. But I, fast forward, a very successful writer who just works for themselves without any bosses, a little bit what Gloria Steinem talked about, no hierarchy and just be in full control. But those are the fantasies. I'm very happy being the physician scientist.
Now when I think about science, I kind of wish, if time had moved and I was shifted to a different time frame, perhaps I would be a neuroscientist, because I'm so fascinated by the enormous challenge that our human brain and therefore our whole entities present to us.
I think I would have always wanted to be an explorer, and going back to the tomb of Tutankhamun and Hammurabi's code and those sorts of readings, I would have been maybe an Egyptologist, discovering something new, or maybe coming from the home of Leakeys who were from Kenya, being an archaeologist, a paleontologist, discovering maybe that's science. But I think new knowledge is what really attracts me.
I've been reasonably precise with the way I write and the way I present arguments. And also now, because of my experience with patenting, I think if I'm not going to be a scientist, I might become a lawyer, or maybe a patent lawyer.
I have a farm, 140 acres, that's on the Kentucky River. We have 2 eagles bonding right now. Every year they nest, and you can see them from our front porch. I'm planting prairie, and this weekend I planted wild perennials, native perennials, short flowers, where my old barn used to be. I will have a few cows. I chase them when get them back into the corral when they do bad things. And I like work. I like being outside and digging ditches. I think maybe I would have been a ditch digger.
You mean other than science or medicine?
There are other careers out there, Kathy. What else do you think could have kept you entertained?
Well, as I said at the beginning, I always enjoyed reading. I don't know. I guess I would have been a teacher.
I would tell you, after having kids, to be a teacher. Now, not kind of a teacher just teaching math, but developing new programs, really thinking about how do we teach children, as they mature, based on what we know about child development, based on what we know about new technologies. I would love to be involved in developing programs that would help young people develop, to their best of their abilities. I think that would probably been as satisfying and to me as important as what I do.
I would. One is I love debates, and I remember I also love acting and just being, present. So I wanted to be a lawyer because law as a career would really allow me to be able to do debates. But then I was like, no, the science and the math could just get me focused, and I loved that. And then I thought, maybe I'll go to divinity school after I've done with my medicine. But then I realized, no. I believed too much in science and technology to go to divinity school. And so, yes, I love being a doctor. And so many times I've thought, should I pick one or the other? But, I've been fortunate to have an esteemed position in society. And the fact that my patients trust me, and the fact that I don't know nearly enough to help every patient just keeps me going.
I'm happy with the career I've had and the life I've had. I'm very lucky. I really think that breaks my heart is the inequality in the world. So something in global, affairs, trying to break economic inequalities, bringing development. That's why I did the global health agenda and research. I feel bad. I go back to my country. I've been lucky to come here when I was 24 years old. I didn't even speak English when I came here. Look where I am. But when I go back, I said, I left them. I betrayed them in some ways. I didn't really do what I could have done. And so you ask me, I said, maybe I could have done more and better in that field, of international equality, political and economic equality.
So, what a privilege I've had. There's nothing that even approaches the ability to do science.
I just for myself, I cannot think of a better profession than being a scientist.